hang on a minute. This doesn't feel like the David Lowery Peter Pan and Wendy movie. Hang on. Now it feels like the David Lowery Peter Pan and Wendy movie. Part 1. A brief overview of the plot. We open with Wendy Darling, a pissy preteen whose parents are sending her away to some sort of boarding school. On her last night in the nursery, after blaming her brother's silly game for a mutual accident, Tinkerbell arrives and starts to pixie dust Wendy out of bed. John and Michael catch the pixie, however, and then Peter arrives, saying that he is there to get Wendy out of there and to collect his shadow. As Wendy sews Peter Pan's shadow on, she catches Peter with the needle, who immediately turns into a cringing coward, and Wendy offers him a kiss, a thimble. The Darling children fly away with Peter and Tinkerbell, reaching a grassy rock in the ocean, which is supposedly Neverland. Likely so named because nobody would want to land there. The pirates shoot a cannon at them, and Wendy is washed up on the shore, where she is found by Tiger Lily and the Lost Boys. They track the pirates who have kidnapped John and Michael to Skull Rock. They track the pirates who have kidnapped John and Michael to mostly submerged and vaguely skull-shaped cave rock. Peter Pan reappears and fights Captain Hook. Wendy and Tiger Lily rescue John and Michael's teddy. Hook wounds Peter, and he is saved by Wendy shouting something girl-powery at Captain Hook. The crocodile chases Captain Hook and everyone escapes. Wendy then slaps Peter for the adventure. Peter sulks. At the Lost Boys' crumbling hideout, Wendy sings a lullaby. Wendy then goes to find Peter and realises that Captain Hook was in fact the first lost boy but left to grow up. Hook arrives and again wounds Peter, who falls in very cool slow motion and dies at the bottom of the stairs. Wendy, John, Michael, the Lost Boys and Tinkerbell are captured by the pirates. Wendy demands to walk the plank in place of all of the others, but with the help of Tinkerbell and some happy thoughts about growing up, Wendy is able to fly to safety. Peter is revived by Tiger Lily, and as he cannot fly, she rides with him on the back of her horse to the pirate ship. Wendy can somehow fight now, and battle commences. Peter Pan and Captain Hook fight, and Peter apologises to the man. But as Captain Hook has no longer got any happy thoughts, he falls into the ocean and is presumed dead. Given a mere 30 seconds to mourn this loss, Wendy tells Peter to take her and the Lost Boys home to London, where no time, it seems, has passed, as we find the parents sleeping soundly in their bed, only to awake to 6 brand new children in their nursery. Peter leaves and finds Captain Hook alive back on the Neverland. Part 2. What was good? Unfortunately, I cannot as a blanket statement say all the costumes. Wendy Darling, for starters. I love the fact that they went, instead of a full nightgown, they gave her sort of those night short things. That's the technical term, I'm sure. Night short things. So that makes her movement easier. That was very cool, but still within keeping for the time period they set it in. I also love her blue coat. I went on about this coat a lot on TikTok. I love this sort of blue nightgown robe coat. I like the lace details and the red lining. It's very cool. Love Wendy's outfit. Visually, Wendy is very good. Equally, Peter Pan's costume I really did like. When I remake it, and I will be making this costume, I am going to give it a few more pops of colour, because even in the movie in broad daylight, it still just looked a little washed out. Although again, I can blame the editing and direction for this as opposed to necessarily the costume itself. However, my costume version will have a lot more bits of colour on it. But nonetheless, it was still very interesting to look at. I had lots of cool details. I like the bits of moss and things. And I also headcanoned that where Tiger Lily patched Peter Pan up and there was a big line of moss, you could see more patches of moss here and there. So I like to feel like the movie was hinting that she'd had to do that before for him, and that's why he had so many different pieces here and there. So I like that. So overall, Peter Pan's costume also really liked it. We didn't really get to see them very much, but Mr. and Mrs. Darling did also look very, very good. Loved their costumes as well. Wish we'd seen more of them. And also Tinkerbell's costume. I loved all the little details up the front and how flowy the skirt was. It was very pretty, very Faye-like. Really liked Tinkerbell's look in this as well. Tiger Lily definitely impressed me the most out of this entire movie. Her casting, number one, was perfect. That's something that I loved. Hearing her speak in her own language, amazing. Love that. That was probably one of my favourite moments in the entire movie. Watching Tiger Lily fight was probably the best part of the movie, but hearing her speak was also amazing. And just how she looked in general, absolutely fantastic. Love that. Whoever is responsible for all of that, amazing. Also, the Lost Boys. Now, I talked about this when I reviewed the trailer, and I stand by what I said. These Lost Boys look very, very cool. They sort of have an aesthetic that fits together, but it's also higgledy-piggledy. There's a little bit of things they've probably found over the years or stolen from pirates and various visitors to the Neverland. There's also some natural bits with leaves and moss and stuff, and yeah, the little bunny ears hat is the cutest thing in the whole world, and I love it. Also, I'm a sucker for pirates, so I really liked the Jolly Roger. However, I am appreciating now, in hindsight, having watched the movie again, I only liked it because it's a pirate ship. But when you think about the actual descriptions of the Jolly Roger, it really doesn't match up. It wasn't as good as it should have been. But nonetheless, as a pirate ship, I liked it. However, in comparison to the Jolly Roger lay low in the water, a rakish looking craft, foul to the hull, every beam in her detestable, she was the cannibal of the seas and scarce needed a watchful eye, for she floated immune in the horror of her name. Yes, I can quote the entire story of Peter Pan. What else did you expect from me? But that is the description of the Jolly Roger that we get in the novel, and I just think that if you hold that description up in comparison to this ship, it doesn't quite match. But nonetheless, it was a pirate ship. It looked like a pirate ship. I like pirate ships. Woo! I also really liked Peter's shadow. We only got to see it a couple of times, but I did like the animation on this. I liked how it worked. It was very fun to watch. Enjoyed those scenes. This thing I was very interested to hear because it is so tricky to do. Peter Pan's crow. Now, I've talked about this in other videos. I did a whole video where I ranked different Peter Pans and their crows. It is incredibly difficult. My crow is not that great. I have been working on it for years. I am still not happy with it. But nonetheless, the crowing in this movie, particularly the first time we hear it, very good. Enjoyed that. Also, just to pat myself on the back a little bit here, I guessed something correctly having watched the first trailer, and I am glad that it was in the movie. And this is Peter Pan not being there. Now, my original idea was that he would be missing for most of the movie, which I appreciated at the time and still know now really wasn't likely to happen in a Disney movie called Peter Pan and Wendy, but it nonetheless would have been a very fascinating take on the tale. But Peter was missing for nearly 15 minutes. I went back and timed it. From the time where they all get shot by the pirates' cannon to the time where he shows up in Skull Rock. And that is a good chunk of time where Peter isn't in the movie. And despite the fact that I'm a Peter Pan hobbyist and obsessionist and Peter Pan is my favourite character in the entire world, that was still very well played. So I liked the fact that Peter just wasn't there and we saw how the island operated without him. There are a couple of shots in particular in this movie that I really, really liked. And the first one was when they are approaching the Neverland and we see Wendy Darling and there's water and it's a vertical shot and we see water on one half of the screen and Wendy Darling on the other, and she touches it and it ripples. And then the scene flips and it goes from a vertical to a horizontal scene and we see her flying over the ocean. And that was just very well done for me. It was a very cool shot, really liked visually watching that, the ripples, and then whoof, it flips. That was very good. The other shot that I really liked in this movie is when Peter has been wounded by Captain Hook and he is falling. And he falls down and down and down that long flight of stairs and he looks so confused and it's just slow motion falling and falling and then you have the doosh impact at the bottom. I liked that. That was a very good moment. Also, there was a line in this movie that genuinely made me cackle so much I had to pause it and then rewind to watch it again. And it's where Peter is talking to John Michael and Wendy Darling and the pirates are firing at them trying to kill them. And John, I think it is, says, "Is it Hook?" And Peter says, "Who else would be trying to kill me this early in the morning?" And I cackled. That was very good. Also, to woodly back in time a little bit, I liked the Darlings' nursery setup. I liked the way it was laid out, I liked that it wasn't too big or too small, and I liked the curtain separating Wendy's bed from the others. I feel like that was a good touch. Also, although we only got to see them for about 10 seconds, I really liked the, I'm going to say mermaids, but it seemed like they had sort of octopusy tentacles, I think. So the mermaidy, octopus, tentacly creatures, whatever they were in the ocean at the beginning when they were coming to the Neverland, they were really cool. Wish we'd seen more of them, or, you know, anything of them. Also, I've talked about the shot where Peter is falling, but right before that, when Captain Hook does wound Peter, and in fact, again in Skull Rock, where Peter is wounded by Captain Hook, I like that they showed this. A lot of people steer away from that, and I did talk about this in the 2003 Peter Pan movie as well. I like it better when people show the blood, the gore, the darkness. This is a dangerous island. This is a dangerous game that is being played. Peter Pan can really get wounded and can really get killed, and seeing Captain Hook actually wound him and draw blood, I like that. Another thing I really liked is having the Lost Boys be of any gender. As Wendy says in the movie, I suppose it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't. If you are still butthurt and really upset by it, then that's on you, man. There is nothing canonically that says that the Lost Boys have to be boys. I consider it to be a title, not a description. So get on board or get out, I guess. Another thing I liked is the first pirate that Captain Hook kills. I say kills because the guy did get back up again, but this pirate was called, because I had the subtitles on, Skylight. Now in the original story, the first pirate that Captain Hook does kill is called Skylights. So I'm hoping that that was a nod towards that, as opposed to a happy accident. But either way, Skylight went first. Hooray! Speaking of the pirates, something else I really liked about this movie was the pirate songs. Whoever is responsible for putting together those numbers, I really love them, so well done you. Captain Hook's hook is on his right hand. Finally, Disney are correcting their error, where Wendy Darling said, "No, John, it was on the left hand." No, Wendy, it was his right hand. It always has been, canonically, Captain Hook's right hand. So, yay for Jude Law, yay for doing that. I also liked it when Captain Hook said of Peter, "This child is no child." Now, that line didn't really go anywhere in this movie, but actually it does harken back to something Hook does say in the original story. He describes Peter as being not a boy, but a fiend that he's fighting, and I really like that. So having Hook say something vaguely similar, I did enjoy that moment. Just in general, the crocodile, really liked her. She was very cool. Big beefy girl, like that for her. This is so small that it will feel very insignificant, but it meant a great deal to me. Peter had dirty fingernails. Like, there was dirt under his fingernails and all in the creases. And that to me was just really cool. I like that as a nod to the fact that Peter doesn't have a family home life. He lives outdoors. He's in the wild all the time. So yeah, I like that. There is another moment, and I'm still not sure whether it was done deliberately or whether it was a continuity error and whether they were actually hearkening to the thing that I think they are, so I may well be giving them too much credit here, but nonetheless I did enjoy the moment. Right after Captain Hook has sliced Peter and he's falling down, he steps into the light and his coat has changed colour and it is now red. It's gone from a sort of dark bluey shadowed coat into this big red coat. Now I'm hoping that this was this movie playing on Captain Hook's eyes turning red when he kills somebody. So if that is what they were going for, then yay! If it wasn't what they were going for, then happy accident, I guess, but either way, it did look very cool. And finally, another tiny, small little thing that nonetheless just made me go, yes, was Peter's reaction when he's hearing Wendy singing the lullaby. I'm still not 100% sure why he had a reaction to Wendy singing the lullaby because we never explained how that was relevant to Peter, but nonetheless, he has this reaction and it's beautiful acting done right at this moment. He is listening and you see him sort of look up and there's a moment of recognition where his nose just twitches slightly. And you can just see all the emotion that he's struggling not to let out in that moment. And then the moment's gone. So that was a really cool bit of acting. Really like that moment. That nose twitch moment, if you will. Part 3. What didn't work? And I'm going to be looking at it as objectively as I can as just a movie. Well, first of all, there is a problem with tone in this movie. It's all over the place. You go from sort of quippy funny moments to attempts at dark moments to Wendy's story flip-flops all over the place. Her character goes from hating her brothers and hating her parents and being rude and then suddenly being desperately protective and Mary suing all over the place. It's all flip-floppy. It gives the feeling of 10 different writers who all wrote a different bit and then came together and smushed it all together into one story. It really doesn't feel cohesive at all. Visually, this movie is very dull. I made the joke at the beginning and I was not kidding. This movie is washed out. It's like they turned down the saturation so far. It is beige. It feels beige. It looks beige. Tonally, it's beige. It's just very washed out and bland. There's no magic. There's no fantasy to this. It is just very dull to look at, which is a real shame because some of these costumes like Tinkerbell's, Peter's, Wendy's are so beautiful to look at, but you just don't get to appreciate them because they are so washed out. Also, I'm sorry to say it, but the music is pretty much as beige as the movie looks. The Neverland itself is really boring. Visually to look at, there is nothing there. It is quite literally a rock in the sea covered in some grass. You see some cliffs, you see some stones, you see some ruins, and that is it. You don't get to explore it, you don't see why it's called the Neverland, you don't see why it's the Island of Fantasy, and there is this terrible moment that had me laughing for all the wrong reasons, where they land again on this grassy rock in the middle of the ocean, which has no magic to it whatsoever. They land on this island and Peter says, completely straight-faced, "Is it everything you dreamed of?" And Wendy goes, "I could never have dreamed of this!" And I'm going, girl, you are a storyteller. Well, the original Wendy was a storyteller. This Wendy never tells a single story in the entire movie. They talk about her telling stories. She sings a lullaby at one point, but never, ever does she tell a single story. We'll get onto Wendy's character later. But, Wendy, darling, you could have dreamed more than this, my girl. Anyone could have dreamed more than a grassy rock in the middle of the ocean. Speaking of looking very dull, Captain Hook is very visually boring to look at. His first entrance is also quite disappointing. He blows open the door and then he steps out. He doesn't have his hook out, it's behind his back. Not like it's a great big reveal, Disney. We all know it's Captain Hook. We know he's got a claw. But he has his gun out and he has a very washed out red waistcoat, a beigey sort of shirt, beigey pants, boots, his hair's lank. He doesn't look visually interesting at all. and he steps out into a visually beige movie and, well, he blends right in. The Lost Boys, thankfully, do look visually very interesting. However, they don't really have anything to do in this movie. They are just sort of there. They exist in the background of some scenes and that is it, and have very few lines of dialogue stretched between all of them. Now, I had to pause and rewind the movie at this point to check whether I had missed it, because they big up, oh, they're going to Skull Rock, and then you don't see it. Skull Rock is just a piece of cliff face with two vaguely eye socket shapes half submerged in the water. It's a blink and you miss it moment, and genuinely the first time I watched this I did not notice. And I hate to say it, Once Upon a Time did that better. See what you brought me to, movie? You made me say that. I need some rum. Speaking of Skull Rock now, Peter Pan's grand reveal back in the movie after 15 minutes of being away, excellent, love that, but his big reveal of being back really was something of nothing. The fighting in this movie is so slow. Now, this might be my brain that needs to talk fast and do things all of the time, but this movie is just slow. In general, it is slow-paced, but also rushed. They managed to rush through all of the plot that they had and get to the end, but they have spent next to no time exploring the Neverland, no time doing anything at all, but also it's so slow-paced. God, I don't know how they managed it. Maybe that's the only piece of magic in this movie, the fact that they managed to be both slow and rushed at the same time. Peter Pan smacked Captain Hook's ass. Wendy Darling slaps Peter Pan, and then her rage and anger goes absolutely nowhere, and the movie continues. After the world's most terrible transition between scenes, it literally goes Wendy slapping Peter Pan, and then this. And we cut to about 2 seconds later where they're all walking along the cliff top and Peter continues the conversation. I don't know why. Was this a mistake? Was it left in by accident? Okay. Captain Hook's backstory goes absolutely nowhere. They built it up over the course of the story where the Lost Boys talk about how Captain Hook wasn't always Hook. And then you see the name James written on the door next to Peter's name. And it's building and building up to seem like some big reveal. And then the only thing that it is that Captain Hook used to be a lost boy. The first lost boy, but nonetheless just another lost boy. I personally, from everything that they were doing, I was expecting that Hook was going to be Peter's brother. I feel like that would have been a much more interesting route to take. Canonically, just to be Peter Pan hobbyist again, canonically Peter does have a brother, so that would have been very, very interesting. But no, they went for the very basic fan theory and they chose to make Hook a lost boy. It could have been much more interesting than it was, but it literally goes nowhere and nothing really happens with it, and it could have been much more interesting. Also, the girl power scene attempting to sort of recreate the Eowyn moment from The Lord of the Rings, where Wendy is saying, "This magic belongs to no boy!" That moment went absolutely nowhere. Whose magic is it then, Wendy? Is it specifically girl magic? Is that what you're saying? If so, how? Why? It goes nowhere, it means nothing. I feel like that line was written by someone trying to write a strong, powerful girl boss character while having absolutely no idea what that means and what that would actually sound like. I feel like that line should have been something along the lines of, "This magic belongs to anyone who believes." Because then, you know, it's saying, you don't believe, old man, you're a codfish, you don't believe in this magic, you can't have it, but I can fly, the Lost Boys can fly, Peter can fly, haha. It would have made more sense. I'll talk about this more in the character section and the adaptation section, but Wendy Darling is Mary Sued, left, right, and center. Also, another thing about Wendy, it is never explained how she can sword fight. All we would have needed is a flashback to Wendy Darling having fencing lessons. We have loads of her flashbacks already. We see her childhood, we see her growing up, we see her happy thoughts. Why did they not just include a snippet of Wendy Darling practicing fencing? That would have been grand. That would have explained the whole thing. But no, instead we get Wendy Darling just being able to sword fight. With no explanation, no rhyme and no reason. Peter Pan is given the grand total of 47 seconds between watching Captain Hook fall from the Jolly Roger and disappear into the water. He hits the water, he doesn't come back up again. Peter rushes to the side, looks over, this clock of 47 seconds is still ticking by the way. He holds the claw of Captain Hook, the only thing that is left of his supposed once best friend and first lost boy. He kneels down on the deck of the Jolly Roger, holding this claw. He is snivelling, he is about to start crying, and he is in a moment of grief. But then it's interrupted, and that's all that he's allowed. And within this tiny window of time, it's about 10 seconds between him kneeling down holding the claw and then being interrupted by Wendy. He is interrupted by the Lost Boys the whole time. They're asking him things like, "What's wrong, Peter?" "What do you think is wrong? He just watched his best friend die, and you all know that it used to be his best friend. Why are you asking him that? You know what's wrong!" And then Peter responds and says, "He was my friend." And then another Lost Boy has the audacity to say, "But we're your friends too. Like, forget that one. You've got us." Again, give him a minute. And then Peter Peter starts to respond, saying things like, "I know, and I'm glad you're my friends, but..." And as he sobs and is about to finish the sentence, Wendy interrupts him. 47 seconds has flown by in a flash as Wendy Darling puts her hand on his shoulder and says, "Peter, shouldn't we get these Lost Boys home?" Like, hey, you've had 47 seconds to watch your old best friend fall to his death, die, not come back up again, and then get over it. You should be done by now, right? Let's go home. I want to go home. Not only is it really insensitive of those characters, and the scripting therefore is terrible in that scene, but also you are just getting into that emotional moment with Peter. You as an audience barely have any time to register what has happened, like, oh no, he really is gone, and oh, Peter's so sad about it. No, he's done. Yeah, that was a really bad moment. I was genuinely quite angry watching that. Nothing to do with being a Peter Pan hobbyist, just simply for, oh my god, let the guy grieve. It was frustrating to watch. And then when Peter gets back to the Neverland and Captain Hook is there and he sort of gives a half smile and it seems like they're going to maybe be friends again, that was sort of a something of nothing ending, really. I feel like that could have been the beginning of a much more interesting movie, but instead it was the last shot of this one. And it was just sort of, something of nothing, really. Part 4. What did this movie take from the Disney movie from 1953? I'm including these sections of what they drew from the novel and from the Disney movie because in the end credits of this movie and in the interviews while they were talking about it, they did say several times that they were drawing both from the Disney movie and from the novel. And in the end credits, it does say based on the Disney movie and the novel. So I'm allowed to do this, and therefore I shall. This also means I need to remember the Disney movie, which is always slightly painful for me, but here goes. Wendy Darling not wanting to grow up, and it being her last night in the nursery. The term pixie dust as opposed to fairy dust. Michael's teddy bear. Second star to the right and straight on till morning. If you know, you know. Poor Nana gets pixie dusted again and is attached on her lead and can't fly and the children fly away without her and every time it makes me sad. Bad Disney doing that to us again. Bad. Did you hear that? Even my dog went, "Aww." See what you did to the poor dog, Disney? Shame. Skull Rock. They also took that shot of Captain Hook standing on the crocodile's open mouth. That was a shot that they took sort of directly from the 1950s Disney movie too. The whole, "No splash, Captain," that scene was taken from the 1950s as well. Pixie dusting the Jolly Roger and it flying all the way back to London. And finally, the entire events of the story happening in just one night / all being a dream. Part 5. What did this movie use from the J.M. Barrie Peter Pan and Wendy novel? Well, first off, they took the name. The title of this movie is Peter Pan and Wendy, which is the title of the novel, Peter Pan and Wendy. Speaking of titles, names are one of the things that this movie took from the novel. So the name Captain Hook, Peter Pan, Wendy, the Neverland, that kind of thing. Nana being chained up in the yard is true to the novel, as is Tinkerbell entering the nursery first and Peter Pan second. Peter Pan looking for his shadow, finding it, and then getting it sewn on for him by Wendy Darling are also true to the novel, as is Peter not knowing what a kiss is, resulting in Wendy giving him a thimble. Tinkerbell speaks in the fairy language, which to everyone who does not understand it, sounds like bells. Skylight, or skylights, being the first kill of the story. The pirates firing Long Tom at the children, resulting in all of them getting separated. Captain Hook being sinister. The pirates also sing in the novel and the stage play as well, so that was taken from the novel as well. The lyrics, however, were changed. Some lines were taken from the original story as well, such as, "To die will be an awfully big adventure," "Boy, why are you crying?" "Strike true," "Proud and insolent youth," and of course, "bad form." Peter calling Captain Hook a codfish is also drawn from the original novel and the play as well. Captain Hook wounding Peter Pan and the crocodile arriving before Captain Hook can finish the job. Peter Pan crowing, the acorn button that Peter Pan gives to Wendy. Captain Hook and the pirates kidnap Wendy, John Michael, and all of the Lost Boys. Captain Hook near fatally wounds Peter Pan. After Peter Pan is wounded, he can neither fly nor swim. And in this movie, we can see that he does not fly. Tiger Lily, much like in the original novel, is a badass fighter. John Darling joining in with the fighting is true in the original novel. However, canonically, Michael Darling should have killed at least one pirate on the Jolly Roger. The Lost Boys returning home to the Darlings' nursery with Wendy, John and Michael is also drawn from the original novel. And finally, Peter Pan leaving and not returning to grow up with the rest of the children is from the original ending of the novel as well. Part 6. How does this movie hold up as an adaptation of the Peter Pan story? Now the Peter Pan hobbyist and obsessionist brain and knowledge is coming out in full force. Alright, here we go, guys. Here we go. The absolute barest of bare bones of the original and true Peter Pan story is present in this movie. It's hanging on by a thread there. It really is an in-name only style adaptation. They took the name of the Neverland, the name of some of the characters, and yeah, that was pretty much it. When you look at Captain Hook's backstory, number one, it wasn't very creative. It was just, he was a lost boy. Okay. I was really hoping they were going to push it all the way and have Captain Hook be Peter Pan's brother. That, again, while still not being canonical to the lore at all, would have been way more interesting, and I would actually have been fine with that in this movie because that's a really interesting idea. However, it was like they took this idea of giving Peter Pan and Hook a story and then sort of tentatively brushed at the edge of the idea but didn't go much further. And ultimately that led to a kind of lackluster ending where we've seen the really good shot of Peter in the ship flying off into the sky, and then we really should focus on Wendy and her growing up and the life back there, and maybe Peter coming back and seeing him with Jane. But instead we then go back to the Neverland, which we just made a big point of leaving in this big spectacular way. We just come back to it for a brief shot of Captain Hook floating in the water and a sort of smile on his face when he looks at Peter and the ship arriving. I get what they were going for, but if you're going to go for it, really go for it. They just didn't. So yeah, everything that they added or took away didn't enhance this story at all. I feel like when you're taking someone else's work, and that is what adaptations are at the end of the day, you're taking someone else's work and you're changing it and making it your own, hopefully with permission most of the time. But if you're going to do that to someone else's work, do it for a reason. Take the story in a different direction, expand on something that wasn't talked about much in the original story, see a character from a different point of view, that kind of thing. And I appreciate that's probably what some of the people involved in this movie think that they were doing, but it really wasn't. And where they were starting to do it, it just really wasn't enough. Also, I don't know what the plot arc of this movie was. Was this a movie about Peter Pan and him having to learn to accept help? Was it about Wendy and accepting that she needs to grow up? Was it about Captain Hook realizing that he sucks? I still don't know what the story this movie was trying to tell was. It seemed like they picked at little bits of ideas and just sort of smushed them together and put a really bad transition in the middle of it, and here we go. And now I'm going to talk about the characters. First of all, this movie really should have been called Wendy and Peter Pan, because their primary focus was on Wendy Darling. However, this version of Wendy Darling is so far removed from the original, it is almost laughable. From the very first time we see her and her first line on the screen, we see Wendy Darling is angry and rude. She is rude to her mother. She is then rude to her brothers. She tells her father that the brothers are at fault for breaking the mirror that technically she broke. She says it's all their silly game. And when John and Michael sadly look up at their big sister and say, you know, why did you do that? She says, well, it's every man for himself. You're a pirate, aren't you? That is so not Wendy Darling. It is kind of scary. And overall, as soon as I saw the opening scene, I knew exactly what this movie was trying to do. They were trying to do what Disney did in their sequel, Return to Neverland with Jane. They are trying to do what the 2003 movie did with their version of Wendy Darling. They are trying to do what the National Theatre's Wendy and Peter Pan show tried to do. They are trying to make Wendy Darling stronger. I have already done a full video about why Wendy Darling does not need to be stronger and why she is a perfectly valid, strong, emotional character in her own right. Please go and check out my 2003 What Did They Do to Wendy Darling video. I do not have time to get all into this again here, but essentially the original Wendy Darling was strong and powerful and brave, and she could cut you down with words. Wendy Darling, the true Wendy Darling, did not need to slap Peter because she could smack him down with words. For instance, when Tinkerbell calls Peter a silly ass after him and Wendy have been having a disagreement, and Wendy says, I almost agree with her. J.M. Barrie then says, fancy Wendy snapping. And Peter realizes this. It's like it is a moment of like, whoa, Wendy. But she does that. She is not afraid to snap back and stand up for herself. So Yeah, this Wendy falls into the trap once again of people assuming that because a female character does not brandish a sword, that therefore she must be weak. And I personally think that that is incredibly insulting to all the people out there who do not want to be physically aggressive, who do not want to fight, who do not want to wave a sword. I may not relate to it because hell yeah, I want to fight and wave a sword. But I know many people who are not like that. And they deserve to have recognition. They deserve to be seen on screen and shown as emotionally strong and powerful people. Just because they don't brandish a sword, that doesn't make you a weak character. Just because a female character is typically feminine and wants to be a mother and grow up and be nurturing, that doesn't make her weak. And I'm very sick of this narrative revolving around Wendy Darling. It needs to get in the bin. So Wendy Darling gets completely Mary Sued in this movie, and it shows. And now let's talk about my favourite character of all time, Peter Pan himself. Peter! Oh, Peter. I have said many different times that I wish more adaptions would lean into some of the vulnerability that Peter shows at key moments in the story and lean into the darkness of his character. But not like this. Talk about an overcorrection. Yeesh. This movie seems to be trying so hard to get away from the 1950s girls talk too much that instead they have turned Peter into a pathetic puppy dog who looks at Wendy Darling when she stabs him with the needle like, "You stabbed me! I don't know what a kiss is, but I think I need one." And then gets slapped in the face and spends the next scene going, "Oh, but you said you wanted an adventure," and then cries on the roof. I don't know who you thought you were writing, movie, but that is not Peter Pan. The true Peter Pan does have moments of emotional vulnerability, but they are very rare, and they always take place when he is by himself. For example, the Marooners Rock scene where we get the famous line, "To die will be an awfully big adventure." That is my favourite part of the entire story. It is crucial to Peter's character, and they fudged it up completely in this movie. What did they do? They did what the 2003 movie did, of course. Do they have Peter standing alone in the dark, on a rock, wounded, about to drown, believing that he is going to die for the first time? He has faced death before, but Peter always forgets, so to him it is the first time. And he is terrified, but he stands on the rock and he manages to be brave in the darkness by himself as a child. And he whispers, "To die will be an awfully big adventure." And he's trying to convince himself before he says goodbye to this life. It is his final goodbye. To no one and nothing in the darkness. Just to himself. Nope, this movie does what the 2003 movie did and has Peter have it as a sort of comeback to Captain Hook. But not just that, the scripting is so terrible because it smushes it all in together. They steal some other lines from the story, which is, "Strike! Strike true!" Which is actually what Tootle says to Peter. "Strike me with the arrow, Peter, strike true." So they have Peter say that to Captain Hook. "Strike if you have the courage." Peter would know that Captain Hook has the courage, by the way. He respects the hell out of that man. He hates him, but he knows he can sword fight. Peter respects that enemy. He would never say that. Anyway, Peter goes, "Strike if you've got the courage, and strike true. For to die will be an awfully big adventure." But he doesn't even get to finish the sentence because Captain Hook interrupts him to join in. They took away Peter's most melancholy, powerful, sorrowful moment that should have been completely by himself and had him share it with Captain Hook. This is not the actor's fault. I like all of the actors in this movie. They are just poorly directed with a poor script and a poor vision all the way through. Poor Peter. This movie does suffer very hard from the wanting to be the 2003 Peter Pan movie quite a lot, and John and Michael get caught up in that because in the original novel and in the original play, John and Michael are not the ones who get captured by the pirates and taken to Marooners/Skull Rock. It is Tiger Lily. And this is quite an important part of the plot because it explains why Tiger Lily stops fighting the Lost Boys, and in fact her and her people come and help Peter and the Lost Boys. Yeah, ignoring all of that for a second, back to John and Michael. Much like in the 2003 movie, this movie also has John and Michael be the ones kidnapped by the pirates and put to Skull/Marooners Rock. I feel like this movie was a bit like the 2003 movie, trying to give them more to do, which is a fair comment. The only thing is that John and Michael have always been side characters. They don't have a great deal to do, but they do get to be seen quite a lot at the beginning and the end of the story, and you do nonetheless get to see the arcs they both go on. John Darling has a really difficult time seeing Peter Pan as his leader and respecting his authority, while also being quite in awe of the boy, especially because he's cut off Hook's hand and he's she's so ready to go on adventures and kill and things like this. So John Darling goes on the arc of, does embrace becoming a lost boy and does join in on the fighting and actually leaves a mark on the Neverland, but I've talked about that in other videos, but also does not respect Peter Pan like the other lost boys do. So John Darling has a whole arc about that. And Michael Darling maintains his sweet innocent status all the way through until just about at the end. The Michael we get at the beginning of the story is saying, I won't go to bed, I won't, and saying, Mother, I'm glad of you, and things like this. And then he gets to the Neverland and forgets very quickly, because of how young he is, he forgets all about his family life and is very quick to call Wendy his mother and just blend in with all the lost boys, and is very happy to do that, and does forget pretty much all of his home life and everything. And then by the end of the story, he has killed canonically at least one pirate. So yeah, Michael Darling, badass. Unfortunately though, we don't get to see any of that in this movie. I'm sensing a theme here. This movie seems to want to make the boy characters weaker. Interesting. Tiger Lily is, as I've already said, badass. I love her in this movie. I don't completely love what they did with her in the script. Again, she's friendly to the Lost Boys and Peter Pan, and that actually is a big arc that happens with her character, but nonetheless, she is badass. I love how she looks. I love hearing her speak in her own language. Finally, an adaptation has done this right. This makes me very, very happy. Love seeing that. And we do get to see her fighting at the end, so we do get those badass moments. Tinkerbell. There really isn't much to talk about with Tinkerbell. I had so high hopes for this. She looked really cool. I loved the actress. I loved the outfit, but her facial expressions weren't big enough. The weird CGI they did to her was weird, and they made her friendly all the way through. So Tinkerbell wasn't really driving any part of the plot. The only thing she really did was give Wendy fairy dust at the end for her girl boss. This isn't boys magic moment. So really there's nothing I can say about Tinkerbell. She didn't save Peter's life. She didn't try to kill Wendy. She's just sort of there. It's a bit of a waste of a character, really. I feel very bad for her. Captain Hook. Well, he was occasionally kind of sinister. Visually, he is as bland and boring as the Neverland. He's a bit of something and nothing. His backstory goes next to nowhere. And yep. That's about it. They took a really nuanced, exciting, interesting character and they turned him into beige. And then we have the Lost Boys, who are the last thing I'm going to talk about. They visually look interesting and they have a handful of lines between them, and yep, they are, much like Tinkerbell, they're also there. Also, I really wish the person playing Tootles had been playing Slightly, because their characters were kind of flipped. Tootles in this was far too confident and out there. I feel like they should have swapped, because if they were playing Slightly, it would have made more sense. But we didn't really get to see enough of them for it to matter too much anyway, I suppose. To sum up then, my thoughts on the live-action Disney Peter Pan and Wendy movie. Visually and tonally, it was very bland. It looked boring, the sets were very boring, there was no magic to it. We only got to see a couple of sprinkles of fairy dust, a few times the children flew, and a glimpse of some mermaids, and that was it. There were only really 2 shots in the entire movie that felt particularly noteworthy. The first one was Wendy flying over the water that then flips while she flies across it, and the second one was Peter falling slowly down the stairs after he's just been slashed by Captain Hook. The fantasy island of the Neverland had no fantasy and next to no colour. Everything was washed out and grey and beige, which fitted the tone and the plot of this movie perfectly. I feel really bad for all of the actors and the people who helped to make this movie, because the people who wrote the scripts and the director did not do a good job. This movie has no magic, no whimsy, and no fun. And ultimately, much like everything in Peter Pan's life, it will be very swiftly forgotten.